bias is a challenging problem to solve for. And I don't think that you can have an elimination of bias, perhaps a mitigation.
We also know the geopolitical angle because it involves Elon Musk, because we are also locked up in negotiations over a trade deal, finding a way to save ourselves from Trump's reciprocal tariffs. So the government may go slow now, but the government will eventually have to get to it. And when they get to it, what do you think they can explore in terms of some regulatory provisions?
Was very strongly worded, particularly because it seemed to be creating a licensing regime for AI models. And so when we talk about regulating AI, I kind of see it as akin to saying, oh, we must regulate software. But because it kind of homogenizes a technological construct that is extremely heterogeneous.
Hello and welcome back to Tracking Trends. Today we are going to be talking about the most trending topic of the past month, Grok. People have jumped in, and there are all kinds of questions that ex users in India have been asking, ex users worldwide have been asking, and the responses that come up, I mean, they are hilarious on some counts. They are very very uh, accurate in on many counts. They are quite a revelation of what you can do with AI. But at the same time, it has also raised many a concern. We are going to be talking about how Grok is different from other AI tools, what are the concerns around it, and what kind of regulation possibly can be in place to make sure that the good things that Grok brings with it are leveraged to the highest extent possible, and yet the downside or the risks that are associated with such an unhinged, unfiltered content generating tool are minimized. Today, I have a very special guest, Meghna Bal. Meghna heads the Esya Centre, which is a technology policy research think tank, and she has been tracking everything that happens in the space of technology policy. And probably their center is one of the most active and I would say one of the smartest teams that are going around analyzing, decoding uh, what's happening in the technology space. Welcome to Tracking Trends, Meghna. Uh,
Thank you very much for having me.
yeah, so let's start today's conversation by uh, talking about what is Grok, how is it different from other AI tools.
So one thing is that Grok doesn't seem to have any content guardrails, which people who have even had conversations with it, it is asking if it does seems to indicate that it doesn't. And many of the things that it said that are controversial, if you ask ChatGPT to say those things, it will refuse, and it will say that its content policy forbids it to do so. So one, I don't think it has a content moderation policy or any kind of guidelines. But I don't know again if it's been tested to its fullest extent, because there is there is speech, for instance, like CSAM, which is absolutely prohibited. But I don't know if anyone has taken it that far. Um, the other thing is that it seems to attune to the tone of the user. So if you're polite with Grok, then it will be polite with you. But if you're not polite, then it will match you slur for slur. And the third thing is that it seems to be getting information or being fed information in real time almost. Whereas other systems, there's a cutoff date. Like they'll only have information from the internet from, let's say, 6 months ago. Um, so those are the three kinds of key differences that I see, that I know of at least, in the case of Grok.
The way we see Grok today, it can be changed over a period of time as it evolves, right? There can be system prompts that can be added from time to time, and that can have a bearing on the character of Grok as we see it, which is today a lot of people see it as, and as Elon Musk claimed, that it's a truthful AI.
Hmm.
It's biased. And a lot of people in India, particularly, depending on which side of the ideological spectrum you are, uh, they say, well, Grok is unbiased because it tells them what they would like to hear. So, is Grok really unbiased?
It's not the technology that is biased. It tends to be, I mean, it's basically the information that is trained on that carries certain biases, and how the, I would say, the model is set up. So I don't know, I think it's interesting. I think it's a hard question to answer. There are dimensions of bias in many AI systems. It's been a long standing issue. It's very difficult to resolve. So there's a good example a couple of years ago, last year, with Google Gemini, where they kind of overcorrected for the potential racial bias
Yeah.
in generative AI systems, right? It started producing images of the US founding fathers as African American. So it is a difficult problem to solve for. If you speak to a lot of people, they'll say that you shouldn't really rely on these systems to be giving you information or providing you information. They're not an encyclopedia. They are a proxy for human expression in a sense. So they can help you generate information. And typically, if you rely on them for that, you should definitely vet what they produce, because they can make up things and uh, you know, uh, or have inaccurate information. So you have to definitely fine tune what you ask them to generate. But I don't know. I think bias is like I said, going back to what I said earlier, bias is a challenging problem to solve for. And I don't think that you can have an elimination of bias, perhaps a mitigation to some extent, but elimination, I think, is um, probably a very difficult kind of expectation to have. And also, just on the point of hallucination, I think it's important to understand that hallucination, depending on the context, may not be a bad thing. So, for instance, uh, AlphaFold, which basically helped devise those protein folds or help discover those protein folds. The reason it was able to do that, or one of the abilities that enabled it to, do that, was basically hallucination. Basically, it's akin to having an imagination in a sense.
So let's get to know what are the key concerns around Grok.
I think, I mean, basically, generative AI tends to present content concerns, content moderation related concerns. But we have to remember that it can't be just mere foul language that prompts, any kind of reaction. It has to be basically unlawful content, and it has to, any kind of restriction on content has to be within the permissible restrictions under Article 19.2 of the Constitution. We also have to understand that in the context of obscenity, which is what it is most frequently accused of, the Supreme Court has established that we need to look at any kind of so-called obscene language or any kind of language through a contemporary community standard uh, lens, which means that, you know, what we can't look at it from how maybe our forefathers would consider it, or whether it would be rude or obscene, etc. Any kind of content, not only language, but how it would be considered today. Now, the thing is that I think something important to consider here is that we are currently used to, in the digital space, two kinds of content systems, right? One is an intermediary, which would be a social media platform where basically the users generate content. The other is a publisher where typically, unless there is some UGC element of it, let's say like you can make comments or things like that, like on some gaming platforms, but typically the content on the platform, the publisher is responsible for producing, right? Either you acquire content or you produce it in house. Now, in the context of generative AI, there's a slight difference because it's both the generative AI system along with the user that have created that content. So there's a slight distinction between both intermediaries and publishers and generative AI systems. Now, the other consideration in play is uh, how how is how what is the ability to control that information, right? Again, so let's look at it across the three kinds of content systems we have online. Intermediaries, it is they have limited ability to control what you post. They can take it down, but they can't prevent you from posting it. um, uh, on a publisher, the control is almost complete, right? Because they are the ones who are responsible for what is going up on their website. And in the context of a generative AI system, I would say the ability to control is moderate because we've seen systems like ChatGPT, which seem to have content moderation policies in place that prevent you from generating some kind of content. But at the same time, we also have to understand that users can bypass some of those guardrails by attacking the system or basically tricking it into um, responding to queries that it would otherwise not be allowed to respond to, or giving information that it would otherwise not be permitted to give by the developer. And we've seen this across the board. So the thing for decision makers to consider is that, one, where is the context where this information is being generated? Is it something like a public square, which is a social media platform, or is it in the privacy of their own home? Because actually, someone gave a good example yesterday. Um, Hate speech is bad in a public square, like a social media platform. But if you're using this to write a book or write a script or some kind of screenplay, then hate speech is not necessarily uh, I mean, not necessarily unlawful because you're writing it as a part of fiction, right? There may be a character that you want to portray who is, who makes such kind of speech, etc. So in that context, so again, the context of in which this speech is being generated, the platform where it is being said, I think that is all very important. That's, I think, what makes AI governance very challenging, or at least ex ante rules for AI very challenging, because I think that um, it is so context dependent, that typically what it merits is an ex post evaluation, which is that something happens, and that typically happens through courts. Something happens, people take it to court, and then the courts kind of decide.
In the context of Grok, if we have to talk about accountability for AI generated output, do we specifically run into a problem because Grok is integrated with X, which is an intermediary?
So I think it's a gray area in India, but
Hmm.
there is case law in Canada involving a chatbot, where basically it was an Air Canada website, and a user asked this chatbot about bereavement fares, and the chatbot gave wrong information on which the user acted, and there was a loss that was incurred. So the user sued, and the court held that Air Canada was responsible and liable for the wrong information that was given, because it said that it is information at the end of the day that is on your website. Doesn't matter if a chatbot has created it. It is
Hmm.
information that is your website, that is on your website, and you are responsible for that information. But that is in Canada. Over here, I would say it's a gray area. We don't know again whether um, it is an intermediary or a publisher, because like I said, the
Right.
content generation happens with the involvement of both the user and the machine,
Right.
and the system more specifically. So I think that it is a sort of gray area, and the decision that has to be made is to what extent do you want to give leeway? Do you want to make it a publisher, in which case that then there are like strict kind of content guidelines that it must adhere to, and it will be responsible for any speech it's generated, even though that response is unpredictable. You don't know what the output is going to be, and the user plays a role in the generation of that speech. Or do you want to create a set of due diligences? So anyway, if it is on a public square and everyone can see its responses, do we then have a different threshold for governance, and for restrictions? And I think that's again something to be considered. But the user element cannot be ignored, I think, because then what you'd have is essentially a nuisance law, right? You would have something that is a publisher where the company that's deployed it is responsible for anything it says. And then you would have maybe a set of motivated users who would go to it and kind of prod it and try to get it to bypass its guardrails and say things, and then say, oh, look, they haven't taken the necessary steps, and hold them liable. So I think it's a challenging thing, but I think that we need to think about it in the context, possibly think about it in the context of a um, safe harbor where you meet certain due diligences.
So last year, around this time, the IT ministry issued an advisory requiring all the AI platforms to seek government permissions before launching any new service. And then, of course, it was withdrawn within a fortnight because there was so much of opposition from the industry. I remember NASCOM at that point in time had asked government to relax applicability norms to limit the scope of the advisory. They had also asked for, removing the continuous requirement for AI companies to seek government permission. They had asked, the need for uh, companies to prepare action taken and status report, simply because it's just not possible to do this, right? We also know the geopolitical angle because it involves Elon Musk, because we are also locked up in negotiations over a trade deal, finding a way to save ourselves from Trump's reciprocal tariffs. So the government may go slow now, but the government will eventually have to get to it. And when they get to it, what do you think they can explore in terms of some regulatory provisions?
Yeah, so the advisory last year, I mean, basically, it was questionable whether it was legally enforceable given the way it was worded and the scope of the subject matter it dealt with. And yeah, it was very strongly worded, particularly because it seemed to be creating a licensing regime for AI models. And I think it was a kind of um, uh, an unrealistic regulatory slash governance expectation, right? Because it said that government that models require government permission, or you require government permission before making any models that are under testing or unreliable. But that in itself is a contradiction, because at least in the context of generative AI, it is completely unreliable, right? Whatever input you give it, you don't know, the output is unpredictable. So that means that basically no models can be released. Um, and then, of course, there were more legally technical things that were wrong with it that I won't bore you with. But like I said, in the context of generative AI, and I think that we need to have model specific conversations on governance, not only model specific, but context specific, because as I said, even these tools in different contexts may have different implications. Certain types of speech, again, that will be kind of for judicial fora to decide. But the liability, again, where it falls, because that is a gray area, I think that's something that needs to be decided. I'm not sure what is the best way, and I mean the best way forward on that is to have consultation and to understand what are the different considerations at play, what are the different contexts, and what are kind of parallels that we can draw from existing content systems, that we can learn from. And again, the limitations of this technology, non-deterministic, stochastic. And so when we talk about regulating AI, I kind of see it as akin to saying, oh, we must regulate software. But because it kind of homogenizes a technological construct that is extremely heterogeneous. Um, and not only from a technology perspective, but from a context perspective, like a deployment context perspective. So I think that we really need to have these kind of nuanced discussions and drill down to what are we dealing with, what is the context that it's being deployed in, and what are the actors that are part of this value chain that have kind of created this model, right? Again, I think that when we think about governance, we focus too much on a handful of companies that are most prominent in the media because of their size or because of other considerations. And I think that we have to again take a kind of whole of industry, whole of ecosystem approach and um, consider products involving AI beyond the kind of handful of companies that are always at the forefront of the minds of decision makers and policymakers.
I think you've made some very pertinent points. The risks of homogenizing technology construct, and more importantly, your last advice that while dabbling with these regulatory initiatives, one needs to keep in mind. Often we end up keeping the big companies in mind while we make regulations, and we tend to ignore the compliance burden on smaller guys. And small is indeed beautiful.
Yes.
And as we are speaking, yesterday the IT minister Ashwini Vaishnav said that the Indian government has already received 200 applications from startups and all who all want to get into the AI field. We have seen in the past vis-a-vis regulations, whether it is GST, whether it is many other kind of regulations, we have seen the small guy has suffered because the small guy doesn't
Yeah.
have the wherewithal to comply. While
Yes.
the big guys will come around and he will do it, and he has the resources to do it. I think that's a very, very valid suggestion, and that has to be taken on board. Thank you, Meghna, for taking time out for this conversation. It involves so many complexities that we just can't do it in one sitting. We'll keep talking. We'll keep coming back on different issues, and we'll see how this entire issue evolves. And thank you, audience, for watching us. And if you like this, what we are doing, what we are talking about, please share this video. Please subscribe to our channel. Stay tuned. Keep coming back to us. Thank you.
Thank you.